The Russians have always been receptive to the idea of talking to us. Or let's go back to the Biden administration. It was not the Russians who refused under any and all circumstances to speak to President Biden or his administration. Far from it. We were the ones that said, no, we will not talk to you. We are morally superior to you. You are bad. And because you are bad, we can't talk to you. This is sort of standard leftist nonsense. President Trump came into office, and the Russians made it very clear that they're quite willing to talk to him. So this is not new by any stretch of the imagination. However, the question is, what is the purpose of the meeting?
That's the key, isn't it? A meeting without purpose is just political theater. The Russians have been signaling for years that they want to talk, but on substance, not symbolism. And if we're not ready to address core strategic concerns, then what's the point? Real diplomacy isn't about headlines or handshake photos. It's about hard truths and lasting agreements. Otherwise, you risk wasting everyone's time and possibly escalating conflict.
The Russians aren't fools. They know how President Trump thinks and behaves. President Trump is very short-term in his horizon. He's not looking long-term at anything. President Trump thinks in terms of, I got to get a win. Well, I got to be the guy that wins. I have to dominate this. They know that. So the real question is, why are they bothering to meet with him? We don't know what President Trump has privately said, because the Russian position is very well known. It's not going to change. Now, there are things that we can do that can accommodate them, and there are things that they could do that could accommodate us, particularly if we're willing to look at a larger strategic picture. And the Russians, if you go back to 2021, before the intervention even began in February of 2022, they set some proposals to us. And if you look at these proposals, they are about the security architecture of Europe.
That detail often gets overlooked. For Russia, this isn't just about Ukraine, it's about the entire post-Cold War structure that left them boxed in. Since the 1990s, they've watched NATO inch closer, treaty by treaty, base by base. To them, this isn't aggression, it's self-preservation. Whether we agree or not, understanding their logic is vital.
And now I think the Russians would be interested in talking not only about the security architecture in Europe, but also in the Middle East and Southwest Asia, because we are busy on their southern border now, along with the Israelis, trying to create havoc and chaos in Azerbaijan and elsewhere. So I think they're interested in the larger strategic picture. What are we interested in? I think President Trump is interested in a meeting that makes a hero out of President Trump.
Right.
Where he can stand there and say, well, I have brought together Zelensky and Putin and we've made peace. No, it's not going to happen. The Russians are going to talk to Zelensky. They don't consider him remotely legitimate, nor should they. The question is, what does President Trump want? And he says he wants Zelensky president. And as far as I know, in this back and forth over the last several hours, the Russians have said absolutely not. And he said, well, if Zelensky's not going to be there, then I can't meet with you. Which, of course, is absurd, because remember, Zelensky, along with this war in Ukraine, Judge, is not his war. Zelensky isn't necessarily his man. In fact, I'm still trying to figure out why President Trump didn't stand up, grab Zelensky by the scruff of his neck, and throw him out of the Oval Office when he was over here. But, I'm at a loss to figure out what's going on with President Trump, except to understand that in basic terms, he's a reality TV guy. He is a brilliant marketer, and he wants a meeting that's going to make him look great and his administration look great. The problem is, I'm not sure he's going to get what he wants, because the Russians are substantive. They're looking for a real outcome.
And that's where the disconnect begins. One side wants a strategic settlement, the other wants a win on the evening news. But serious negotiations can't happen if one party sees the process as a campaign stunt. The Russians have a long memory. They're not playing checkers here. They're playing chess.
The Ukrainian people want this war to end. There's no question about that. Zelensky is never going to acknowledge the legitimate control of anything in eastern Ukraine by the Russians. So that's the first thing. So that's an absolute non-starter. Secondly, Ukraine has to be demilitarized. That is, whatever remains of this Ukrainian state, what we call rump Ukraine. And I'm not sure that the current Ukrainian leadership is prepared to go along with that either. I'm unconvinced that there are only two demands, though. I listened to translated, of course, uh, comments by Yushakov this morning, who was speaking for the government. I did not get the impression that all but those two demands had been brushed aside. Okay. So I'm a little skeptical of that.
That skepticism is warranted. In wartime, even translated statements can be weaponized or misinterpreted. When you don't have trust or a consistent diplomatic back channel, even basic communication becomes a high-stakes guessing game. That's when mistakes get made, and those mistakes can become crises.
Does Donald Trump and do the people around him, Vance, Hegseth, Rubio, whoever else you want to put in that group, I don't think they understand the Russian mentality or Vladimir Putin's thinking and personal determination. Do you?
Honestly, I don't think many of them do. Understanding Russia requires more than just reading reports. It requires knowing their history, their trauma, their view of the world. Putin isn't irrational, he's reactive. And treating him like a cartoon villain only ensures we miss the real dangers.
You remember that President Trump sat in the Oval Office and turned to Zelensky and said to him, "You have no cards to play."
Right.
Well, right now, President Trump in Ukraine has no cards to play. If telling Donahue to threaten war against Russia is the card he thinks he has to play, then he's lost his mind.
That part struck me. When you've spent decades studying war and strategy, you know how fragile peace really is. Tactical nukes are a myth. There's no such thing as a small nuclear war. Once you cross that threshold, you don't get to control what happens next. It's a level of risk that should terrify anyone with even a basic grasp of military history.
Because the thing we need to keep in mind, if you go back through all these simulations that we have had over many, many years, and I'm talking about in my experience in the military when I was on active duty and since then, all of the ones that specifically were involved with the Soviet Union inevitably escalated to the nuclear level. And when they did, people concluded pretty accurately that once you hit that level, it was very difficult to control anything.
That's the terrifying part most people don't realize. Once you introduce nuclear weapons into the equation, you're not just managing a conflict anymore, you're gambling with civilization itself. And history has shown us the systems we rely on to manage escalation aren't as fail-safe as we'd like to believe.
And the notion that you could use a so-called tactical nuclear weapon and be sure that everyone on the other side would know, well, this is only tactical. You know, as Colin Powell said at the time, I don't think you can drop a nuke on someone and then tell them this is a small one and not expect a response. It's just nonsense. I think we've reached the point where James Madison, and you're a better constitutional scholar than I am, I think it was in number 10, he said that they're trying to structure power in such a way in government to compensate or at least cope with the possibility that we will not, quote unquote, always have an enlightened man at the helm. The problem is we've reached a point where I don't think we have very many enlightened men. Anybody who talks casually, as this four-star did, this man Donahue, and another co-architect of the disaster in Afghanistan and its withdrawal, once you talk in those terms, you demonstrate that you've lost touch with reality. And the bad news for us, or I guess the good news for us, is that the Russians haven't, because Putin has bent over backwards to avoid these provocations leading to a nuclear exchange. That's the last thing that he wants, and he will do everything he can to avoid it. But at some point, he will lose patience if we persist along these lines. And I would not want that to happen. I think it would be better for us to now exercise some restraint and find a different way forward. Negotiate intelligently.
That word, intelligently, carries weight. Diplomacy isn't about emotion or theatrics, it's about long-term vision. If we lack a strategy beyond short-term wins and headlines, we're just repeating the same mistakes that led to crisis after crisis. It's time we think in decades, not election cycles.
But first, if you're going to meet with the man, and this is something President Trump needs to understand, you have to have a larger strategic architecture in mind. It's not enough just to have a meeting and say, well, let's sort out Ukraine. No, let's sort it all out. Let's make it clear what our interests are. What are your interests? What are our interests? How do we make these harmonize? And if we can, then we can avoid future conflict. That ought to be the goal. I don't hear
does-
anybody saying that.
I don't know if Donald Trump understands that or even cares about it, or if he just wants to bring about a even temporary cessation in activities so that the people who vote on the Nobel Peace Prize, for which he was nominated by Benjamin Netanyahu, you can't make that up, will look upon him favorably.
Well, the group of women in Norway that decided, the last one that I paid attention to, gave it to Barack Obama for being not white and getting elected.
Right.
Now, I suppose you could turn around and do something equally stupid for Trump. I don't know. I've kind of walked away from the whole Nobel Peace Prize business. The ones that have to do with substance, especially science, engineering, technology, and possibly literature, are meaningful. But this business with the Peace Prize, I don't know that it's all that meaningful.
That cynicism isn't unwarranted. The Peace Prize once honored visionaries who shaped the world for the better. Now it often feels like a political gesture. But beneath that, there's a deeper issue. We're rewarding performance, not progress. Real peace isn't glamorous. It's quiet, deliberate, and difficult. And right now, we're not seeing much of that on the world stage.